What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like it a magic, and today we finally get to cover a deck I've been wanting to talk about since like the beginning of the season. Today we're going to cover Dimir Latrata, for lack of a better name. Here we go. You know, I keep wanting to call this deck Dimir Lasagna, but it doesn't quite fit, you know, but either way, the point here is that we're trying to make some Etrata Tui. These puns are making me hungry. One more, actually. Etrata is a spicy meatball. The assassin flavor is on point here, just finger licking. And, like, the art, height of dopeness, like, this is actually one of my favorite cards on a personal level from Guilds of Ravnica. I love everything about it, but that said, it hasn't exactly made it through to the top tables of standard or anything yet, but don't let that fool you. When Etrata goes to work, she can bring home checks. Etrata is actually a decent form of removal. Just like by herself, you know. Every time this gets through, and it's more or less guaranteed to get through, it's going to take out the biggest threat on the other side of the table. It's good enough by itself, even if you actually don't get the 3 hit counters and get the amazing alternate win condition, and everybody at F&M's like, oh, that meme where everybody's going crazy and the guys in the hoodies like, oh my god. Like, that doesn't actually have to happen, you know? You can just win the game by dealing damage to the opponent, and Etrata helps you do that too, you know? 3 more or less guaranteed damage that takes out the most important thing that you're worried about the most on the other side of the table. So, like, that's a good enough card in and of itself, even if you never get 3 hit counters. It's fine. Sometimes this is functionally like a Vraska's Contempt, that instead of gaining you 2 life, deals 3 to them, and then the Vraska's Contempt shuffles back into your library. Like, that's actually a really, really good card. And it blocks in the meantime. It's got a really big butt, you know, 5 toughness is not bad in terms of, like, you know, blocking well and not eating removal spells immediately. 5 toughness is a really good benchmark in this format. And note, too, by the way, that we're playing 4 copies of this because you kind of always want to see it. You know, like if you play one and you get through with it and you have another one in your hand, that's awesome. That's exactly what you want. So you can kind of guilt-free just play 4 copies of this. But before I move on, I guess the only other thing I want to clear up is the first of a couple of different rules questions that I need to address, you know, during this video at some point. And that's the fact that I still keep seeing people say on the internet that their belief is that this doesn't shuffle in into your library until someone loses the game. And that's just not true. It shuffles back in every single time. Check the release notes, you know, check the gatherer rulings on the card. Every single time that it gets through, puts a hit counter on something and exiles it, then it will shuffle back into your library. It kind of seems like it sucks. But again, we've got some tricks in this deck to get Etrata's back as quickly as possible. And again, we carry 4, so it's not too hard to just draw into another one. Enough of Frittata, though. Let's move on to Lasagna, the multi-unfarious. There's so much we can do with this card in this deck. I won't go all the way and play 4, but 3 copies is pretty much exactly where we want to be. If we can get this on turn 2, I'm totally fine with that, but anytime after that, it's still a great card, especially after that. In most games, you know, Lazav is really, really good on, like, turn 5 or 6, and you can't say that about a bunch of 2-drops. You know, the battlefield trigger is actually really good. You know, surveilling 1 doesn't seem like much, but fixing your next draw step or maybe even providing itself a little bit of fuel is a good thing for a card to be able to do just on turn 2. And it blocks pretty well in the early game too. But really the action is when you can start, like, let's say they did kill an Etrata, or maybe you surveilled an Etrata into your graveyard. Well, you copy it with Lazav and bing bang, then you can put another hit counter on something and you're way closer to getting those 3 hit counters that you need. This is another rules thing I guess I need to address. I've had a few people, since I've mentioned this before, say like, wait, does that work? Because its name is still Lazav, but Etrata says when Etrata deals combat damage, yeah, it still works. Because you can always just replace any instance of a creature's name in a text box with this creature. So Lazav will still read, even if it's Etrata, when this creature deals combat damage, you know, exile creature, put a hit counter on it, and then shuffle this creature back into its owner's library. So you will still have to shuffle Lazav back into your library if it hits while it's an Etrata. Like, in a way, this kind of gives us 7 copies of Etrata in the deck, which is good enough, but this can copy everything else all up and down the curve, and it gives us incentive to play a lot of really neat and powerful creatures in the deck, too. You know, Lazav is good enough kind of by itself, even if it's only copying Etrata, but we've got a lot of fuel for this card in the deck. Case in point, Thief of Sanity, which we're playing all 4 copies of. This is just a gas card, like, by itself. If there were no other creatures in the deck, like, Thief of Sanity is insane. People are calling it the new Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and I kind of want to pull back on that a little bit, you know. I think the fact that Glint Sleeve was a 2-drop and this is a 3-drop makes this entire world of difference, but this is still a really, really impressive card. If it gets through even once, your chances of winning the game just skyrocket. You get the best card from your opponent's top 3, and you get to pay whatever mana you want for it. So it's just card advantage, and really good card advantage at that. You get to steal one of your opponent's most impactful cards from them, then play it yourself, in a way that's like having more removal and more threats in your deck, or even counter spells if you ever need them. So you're probably covering up the mic a little bit, buddy, but still, you guys get the gist. Thief of Sanity is freaking insane, and that's kind of a pun. There's also this cool curve you can get where you go like turn 2 Lazav into turn 3 Thief of Sanity, and you're like, what are you gonna do, bruh? You come at me, because it doesn't matter what they kill at that point. You're probably getting through with a Thief of Sanity, even if its name happens to be Lazav at the time. But still, again, let me remind you, read this whenever this creature deals combat damage, do this thing. So even if Lazav is Thief of Sanity, you still get to pull from the top 3 of their library, and it's just an absolutely nuts ability. But everything I've shown you so far requires some amount of protecting, We're really building a lot around these last 3 creatures, so we want to be able to keep them out if we possibly can. Even though Etrata's kind of resilient to removal, there's still removal spells that can kill her. Obviously, Lazav and Thief of Sanity are even more killable than that. So, with all that said, I'm playing 3 copies of Siren Stormtamer here for a number of reasons. Not only can it protect those creatures that we like to protect, but this also keeps our opponent honest with their Settle the Wreckages. That's nice, we can counter Settle with this, because Settle targets us. So that's pretty cool right there, but we can also do the Lazav trick, If Siren Stormtamer's in our graveyard, then we can just pay 1 mana at instant speed to change Lazav into a Stormtamer, and then pay another mana to counter something. So that can be a really good trick sometimes if you need to protect an Etrata or Thief of Sanity or something on the fly. Now we do need to fill out that 3-drop slot a little bit, but don't worry, we got the perfect creature, guys. Let's try Isareth the Awakener here. Isareth? How's he doing? Anyway, this is a good card. A good card for the deck, and just about any deck right now. This thing is increased in price by about 40%, and it's still like only 50 cents. But still, it's seen a recent rise in the last few weeks because some of the green-black decks play it, and a couple of others. But this is obviously a fine 3-drop. 3-mana 3/3 Death Touch is at least decent stats by itself, but sometimes this will bring back an Etrata if they've managed to kill it or you surveilled it into your graveyard. Brings back Thief of Sanity, Lazav, Siren Stormtamer for a mana if that's what you want to do. There's just a lot of value with this card in the deck, and in these long, kind of grindy-ish games against decks like green-black, this card can give us a lot of value. Now, of course, we're also looking for more 2-drop creatures to play, because this is kind of an aggro-y, tempo-y deck. It's got to play a bunch of creatures to squeeze as much value out of both Lazav and Isareth and a couple of other cards that we're playing. So, that said, we have to play a number of good 2-drop creatures, and there's a few that I like more than others, starting with Kite Marauder. I think if we're looking for any one good 2-drop to abuse in the Lazav deck at the very least, this is probably the best one we could pick. And having multiple Kites out is often really good, and it's a situation we'll run into a lot, Either we'll straight up have 2 Kites, or we'll have like a Kite for real, and then the Lazav set to the Kite in our graveyard. And in those cases, we can punch through for a lot of damage in just a couple of turns, even if our opponent has like a Resplendent Angel and an Aurelia. It's not too hard to still win the game in those situations, because you're just blanking them during your attack step, and that's all you really care about in this deck anyway. Now, we had options for other 2-drops here, but specifically for this deck, I picked one which may seem a little bit controversial, but this thing is actually really good. That's Departed Deckhand. It's an impressive card right here, and if it makes you feel any better, I actually did just see it in the sideboard of an MTGO competitive league standard like 5-0 deck the other day. I was surprised to see it there, but there it was. I believe it was Grixis Control or something. It was ridiculous that this was in the board, but they had like an aggro sideboard plan where they also played, the Haste Unblockable Izzet guy, the 2/2 for 3 mana. So that was a weird sideboard, and I don't think it's indicative of where Standard is heading or anything, but it was cool to see it there, and I am not going to apologize for playing it here. This thing is really, really good, whether you get it on curve and just start attacking for 2 guaranteed damage every turn. And later in the game, it'll start, guaranteeing even more damage once you have mana to pump into it. Or, let's say, it dies, which it can easily do. Obviously, if it dies, Lazav can just copy it out of your graveyard and not only get through unblocked for 2 every turn, but also start letting other stuff go unblocked too. So that's just really good once Lazav, once you hit 6 mana, and you can turn Lazav into this and make something else unblockable at the same time, and you've got an Etrata swinging. Like, those are the attack steps you win the game on. So the ability that this card has to sort of apply pressure in these more grindy, slower, mid-rangey games, especially against decks like green-black, that really just all they want to do is grind anyway, and the games get to turn 7, 8, 9 anyway. A card like this can just provide a lot of guaranteed damage over the course of a game and end up making the difference. Now, Etrata's not our only 4-drop creature in the deck, and this is another slot where you have some options. Like, for a while I was playing Vraska's Contempt, and then I switched over to Ravenous Chupacabra because I figured we needed some creatures instead of spells, if we could possibly do that, But what I ended up on here was Night Veil Predator, which I'm a little surprised with myself. I think you could probably still play Chupacabra in this slot to fine effect, but this is good in a lot of ways too. Against control decks, it's a hexproof threat they kind of have to deal with, and it can be a real headache for them. But this is also a way to give Lazav hexproof at instant speed if you absolutely must. So it costs 4 mana, and this has to be in your graveyard, but it at least makes that play available, and I think that's important. But the last of our 28 creatures is the 1 copy of Doom Whisperer that I'm playing in the deck, mostly because I don't want to pay $25 for like 4 copies of Doom Whisperer, but I'm not actually sure that I would play 4 copies of this. I think 1 or 2 is actually fine in this deck for a couple of different reasons, but this is obviously just going to be a good finisher no matter when you get it down, and even if it does die immediately, it can sometimes help you find a copy of Etrata that you've shuffled back into your library. You can get 2, 4, 6 cards off of this if you're willing to pay the life. It'll get you that much closer to not only Etrata but many other cards that you might need. And the whole time it's just like surveilling creatures into your graveyard if you want them there for Lazav to copy. So there's a lot of good reasons to play the card in the deck. You could push it to 2 copies if you wanted to, but the deck wins the game in a few different ways. Not only Etrata triggers, obviously, but just straight up unblockable or evasive damage. Most of our creatures either fly or are unblockable. So we're just looking to chip in damage, sort of like a tempo or aggro deck, until we can win the game that way. But sometimes Doom Whisperer will come down and provide sort of a finishing move for us. That last 6 damage is sometimes really important. Now, we've got room for 8 spells in this deck, and I've played all different numbers of spells. Like, I played up to 12 spells in this deck before, but we really need some creatures to make the Mausoleum Secrets work. We're playing 3 copies of this, and mostly the big idea is to be able to just summon up Etrata whenever she shuffles back in. Not actually too hard to do as long as we have 4 creatures in our graveyard. Which is, again, not as hard as you might think. There's 28 creatures in this deck, so starting, turn 5, turn 6, when we would have to go get Etrata anyway, it's entirely possible for us to have 4 creatures in our graveyard. So, if only for that reason, Mausoleum Secrets, I think, should be in the deck, and I've thought about pushing it to 4 copies, because the synergy with Etrata is obvious and very real. So, there's that. But there's also the fact this can search up the 1 copy of Doom Whisperer, search up Lazav or Thief of Sanity if we wanted to. Like, oh, that's good, too. You can go get an Asareth if that's what we want. I mean, you see my point here. We can get just about any card in the deck, given that it's black. And there's plenty of black cards that you might want to go search up in the deck at any given time. There's the Etrata trick, but just about anything you can do with this is pure utility. It's sweet to have a tutor like this for only 2 mana in standard. We'll make use of it. And it can also search up a copy of Thought Erasure if we absolutely have to do that. If we sniffed out a Settle the Wreckage or something, or we think our opponent's going to Cleansing Nova us the next turn, then sometimes we can just go get a Thought Erasure, even if we only have 2 creatures in our graveyard, and, see what our opponent's plan is, if nothing else, but get those problem cards out of their hand. And, of course, even if you don't search this up with Mausoleum Secrets, we want this on turn 2. A lot of games, against control, this is a really good card, just getting, mass removal and even just targeted removal out of their hand to make counter spells and stuff to make sure we can execute our plan safely. But even against, aggro and mid-range and other creature-based decks and stuff, this will just get huge threats that would otherwise, be real problems for us out of their hand. This is a form of just 2 mana removal. It's no Vraska's Contempt or anything. It's not Assassin's Trophy. But it is still a proactive form of removal that gets the most headachy card out of their hand for the rest of the game if we cast it on curve, and can surveil stuff in the graveyard for Lazav to copy or whatever. There's just no good reason not to play the full complement of this card. But I couldn't resist playing 1 copy of Helm of the Host in the deck, and you could probably make this like 2 or 3 copies. Like, there are some games where Helm of the Host just takes things over completely, and like, even if you're not copying Etrata, which, I mean, to be clear, that is why the card's in the deck, because it's ridiculous with Etrata, and it gets pretty quick. It ends the game quickly in just a couple of turns, But all that being said, it can still copy, you know, Thief of Sanity if you wanted to great effect, or even like Departed Deckhand. It can copy to pretty good effect if you got nothing else to do with it. Kite Marauder is a good copy, so just about every creature in the deck is sweet to get extra copies of with Helm of the Host. If you can actually get this down and start getting value out of it, it's a crazy card. We're playing 24 lands in the deck, and it's pretty much, I think, exactly what you'd expect. Just, you know, dual lands and basics. You could jazz it up with Memorial to Folly, Memorial to Genius, some Dimir Guild Gates, a Field of Ruin or two, whatever you want to do, but this basic package helps us out a lot. You know, it's got all the sources that we need in each color. Untapped sources on turn 1 for Siren Storm Tamer. You know, you really don't have to do much more than this if you don't want to. But here's our sideboard, and we actually do need some untapped black sources as well on turn 1 for this Pilfering Imp you see here, guys. I have, you know, extolled this card before. I've said this card is quite good, and I'm sticking to it. I like Pilfering Imp a lot, especially in a deck that needs more creatures. You know, this contributes to the undergrowth count for Mausoleum Secrets. It's something Lazav can copy if you want to. Often you will not want to, but if you want to, you know, gives us another 1/1 flyer on turn 1 some of the time. So we take to the skies pretty early in this deck. Just like a lot about Imp, you know, it's another Thought Erasure type card against control decks and stuff. And I feel like in a deck like this, again, that wants creatures, it's a better duress. We're also playing Knight of Malice against the various white decks in the format. You know, there's mono-white aggro, there's green-white, there's red-white, there's a bunch of white going around right now. So Knight of Malice is just a pimp against those decks. Ridiculous. So we'll play that card, no questions asked. But there's some other obvious stuff in here like Negate, play that against Control. But you'll note the Lookout's Dispersal, which started life as Disdainful Stroke. But we've actually got like 11 pirates in this deck, so why not play Lookout's Dispersal? But we'll finish it off with Ritual of Soot here. This is actually a really important card for the deck. We're not playing a ton of removal. I don't know if you noticed, but it's kind of just like Etrata and Thought Erasure, if you want to count that. You know, this deck had Cast Downs and Moment of Cravings in the sideboard. At one point it had Vraska's Contemns in the main deck, but and Ravenous Chupacabras, which again I think you could play instead of Nightveil Predator. But all I'm saying is this deck became way more creature focused in its final iterations, and doesn't play as much removal. It's not as much of a mid-range deck at the end of the day. So removal like this is actually really important to keep the aggro decks off of our back, because it's actually one of our worst matchups. Against these grindy mid-range decks and against control, we have a lot of reanimative elements. You know, we have resilience out of our graveyard. We can get value out of our yard pretty easily in the deck, but we kind of get run over because we have relatively slow starts some of the time. So against hardline aggro decks, Ritual of Soot is a really important card, and even if we lose a couple of creatures to it, it's totally fine. You know, we can copy stuff out of the graveyard with Lazav, we can play in Isarath and just start getting stuff back. A Ritual of Soot is not that big of a deal for us, but it can be a huge deal against the Boros or mono red or mono white player. And before we get to the power rankings, I've just got a couple of things, kind of a lot this time actually, that I want to run through that I didn't play, that you could play if you wanted to, starting with Stitcher Supplier. I'm not going to say much about it, but I kind of had the same complaint that I had in the Sultai Etrata deck. You know, it just goes a little bit too hard for what we're trying to do here, but, you know, if you want to get the most value out of Undergrowth, then Stitcher Supplier is probably what you want to be doing. There's also some cute stuff, though. Like, you could play Demon of Catastrophes, especially if you're playing Stitcher Supplier. Seems like another cute combination. But Demon of Catastrophes is nice. You can copy it with Lazav once it does go into your graveyard. And obviously, you don't have to sacrifice creature or anything. You just have a 6/6 flying trample. So that seems good. But Traxos is also a cute card. I see it brought up in conjunction with this deck an awful lot. I did not have the stones to play Traxos, but you could try it out if that's what you wanted to do. It seems fine. But there's also maybe stuff that seems a little bit more impactful, like Twilight Prophet. I think a one-of Twilight Prophet is probably at least playable, maybe. You can give it a shot in this deck. But there's also Bone Dragon. I think the Doom Whisperer is just a better card, but I see why people are talking Bone Dragon. Just want to bring it up while we have time. One of the cards I'm most interested in playing for this deck is Notion Rain. If you didn't want to play you know, so many Isarath, maybe you can cut one copy of Siren Storm Tamer. I think it'd be possible to fit a 2-of Notion Rain in the deck, and that might be really beneficial for multiple reasons. There's also other cute stuff, like Gruesome Menagerie. This is another thing. If you play Stitcher Supplier, then you've got Stitcher Supplier and Siren Storm Tamer as 1-drops. You can play other ones if you wanted to. You've got Departed Deckhand, Lazav, Kite Marauder is 2-drops. You've got Isara, Thief of Sanity is 3-drops. So there are these ridiculous Gruesome Menagerie plays where on turn, you know, 5, 6, 7, you can just get 3 ridiculous creatures all back at the same time. So I could see, you know, 1 or 2 of Menagerie in the deck, or even if it's just a 1-of, you search it up with secrets in the late game, that could probably work. But here are your power rankings. A final score of 62. We don't do anything super poorly, although again we could have better defense, you know. There is that, but we're kind of, you know, a deck that's just trying to get through as much combat damage as possible in a guaranteed way as we can, and then get extra value as we pick it up, you know. Thief of Sanity not only adds 2 almost guaranteed combat damage every combat step, or at least it's evasive, it's more guaranteed than ground damage. But we also get insane value when it does hit for that combat damage. Same thing with the Etrata, you know. It's pretty much guaranteed to get us 3 combat damage on the steps where it gets through, and it's a removal piece when it does. So we're getting a lot of our value from our attacking creatures. You know, Kite Marauder, that creates value when it attacks as well, or at least a form of value. And then Lazav, we kind of funnel all these creatures into Lazav. So if any of them ever die, we can get value from Lazav, you know, and Asareth can bring them back. So we've got a kind of loopy, again, value town kind of engine here that is very grindy and wants to get to the late game. But it's well positioned in a format like this where green-black is kind of the de facto king, at least for the last week or so, while the format's still developing. And these grindy decks are actually really, really good choices. You know, it's fine too in the control matchups because, again, we have a lot of ways of getting value out of our graveyard, and that's really good against control right now and pretty much always. And it doesn't even have to grind all the time. Like, again, the alternate win condition, even though it's not like the highest priority, is still available in the deck. There will be those hands where you go like, Etrata, get through, shuffle in, play the Etrata that I had in my hand the whole time again, you know, get through with that. Mausoleum Secrets, get that Etrata back, play it again. Like, there are those times where you'll just be able to get those 3 hit counters, bing, bang, boom. It happens. But again, you don't have to focus on that. It's just a thing that can happen. And I like decks that do that. It plays Magic at least somewhat fairly. You know, it wants to get through for combat damage and win in that kind of traditional way. But at least it has an alternate win condition available to it, which really only increases its options. So if you are interested in giving the thing a shot, just click the first link in the description as always. That'll take you over to my buddies at TCG Player, my sponsors. They're good folks over there. They are the cheapest place you're going to get the deck online, so that's pretty nice of them. So click the first link in the description. If you want to check out the deck list, order any pieces that you need from them, that'd be fine by me. You can also like and share the video if you got the time. You got an extra second, just click the buttons down there. Hit subscribe if you haven't done that yet. You know, more deck techage. Everybody wants that in their life. Make sure you hit the bell for notifications. Or you can throw me $1 on Patreon if you really like my face. But I'll give you something for it. You know, you can participate in these polls that determine what decks we're doing next. I do those like 3 times a week now. So if you want to vote and help determine the course of YouTube history itself, just throw me $1 every 30 days on Patreon. You can vote in those polls, and I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before we do them, which comes in handy. On days where I don't do a poll. Like, you know, this time I just told my patrons, like, okay, guys, I'm doing Etrata. Sorry, I'm doing Etrata. So I'll at least let you know what we're doing the day before we do it, even if I don't do a poll, if that made any sense. But get over there, throw me $1 if you possibly can afford it, and I'd really appreciate it. But I think that's all I got to say for this one. Who knows what we're doing next? There's a Patreon poll up right now if you're interested in voting for Sunday's deck. So do that, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. Either way, the point here is that we're trying to make some Etrata 2-y. These puns are making me hungry.
I don't even know what that means, but that was hilarious.
Thanks, I worked hard on that one.